Imagine you've been tasked with tackling some of society's biggest problems. Things like drug and alcohol misuse, violent crime, the obesity epidemic. I've been working in public health for 17 years, much of that in local government, with a whole range of other colleagues who similarly have the job of trying to do something about these kinds of problems. And it hasn't been especially easy. We put interventions in place, we write strategies, we have lots of meetings about these things. We have meetings about the meetings. And sometimes even meetings about the meetings about the meetings. But it feels like whatever we do on these really big, persistent challenges, we barely scratch the surface. And when you look at the statistics over time, it's clear that we're just not getting it right. So imagine it is your job to try and do something about these problems. Where would you begin? Well, you might start by asking what the experts on these topics have got to say and look at what research has been done that might provide some answers. And if you did that, you would soon become immersed in a whole array of seemingly competing approaches and perspectives offering different explanations for what causes these problems and what we could do to fix them, all linked to research evidence from a spectrum of academic and scientific disciplines. You could easily end up feeling pretty confused. And at the start of my career, that is exactly what happened to me. But in time, I came to understand that it wasn't that one of these perspectives was right and all of the others were wrong, but rather each was a window offering a restricted view of one whole big landscape. It's like that old tale of the blind men touching different parts of an elephant and trying to work out what it is, but each believing that the part they are touching represents the whole object. So somebody grabs the tail and thinks it's a snake, and somebody else runs their hand up one of the legs and says, oh, this is a tree trunk. If we're going to stand a chance of really having an impact on these big challenges, we need to be feeling the whole of the elephant. And I'm going to take one of those issues I mentioned, the so-called global obesity epidemic, to show you what I mean. Let's imagine a fictional character. We'll call her Jo. Jo is 30 years old. She has struggled with her weight for much of her life, and she has obesity. But if we delve into Jo's backstory, we don't find one single explanation for this, but a whole range of contributing factors that Jo has been exposed to over the course of her life, all shown by research evidence to increase the risk of obesity. So let's have a look at some of them. When she was a child, Jo experienced emotional abuse, violence in the home, and her parents separated. She's always lived in a poorer neighbourhood and struggled for money. She has an office job where she sits at a desk 7 or 8 hours a day, and she has to drive to get to it. Even if it was close enough for her to walk to, she wouldn't feel safe enough to do so because of her fear of levels of crime in her neighbourhood. In her leisure time, she's also often sitting down in front of a screen, playing games, watching videos and so on. And all the time she's doing that, she's getting bombarded with advertising and influencer marketing for unhealthy food and drink. And when she was growing up, the people around Jo didn't live particularly healthy lives themselves. So she didn't naturally absorb the knowledge and the habits that would have enabled her to easily adopt a healthy way of living in later life. And in her neighbourhood, there is an overabundance of fast food takeaways, and the most affordable food is often the least healthy. And Jo has a lot of stress from her childhood experiences, her money worries, her job, feeling unsafe where she lives, and her struggles with her own weight. She tries to lose weight, she worries about the impact it will have on her long-term health, but every time she makes some progress, she finds herself slipping backwards, and she doesn't understand why. But ultimately, Jo blames herself. The truth is, a combination of these factors and others have been working against Jo her whole life, increasing the chances that she would develop obesity in the first place, and then pushing against any efforts she might make to do something about it once she had. Now let's imagine a different set of characters, each with a professional interest in the obesity problem. What might they have to say about Jo's situation? Well, the doctor talks about the biological mechanisms involved in weight gain and gives Jo the classic advice to eat less and move more. And if that doesn't work, well, maybe we'll have to think about appetite suppressants or even bariatric surgery. But the psychologist says, hold on a minute. We should be addressing the underlying problem of Jo's chronic stress and her traumatic childhood experiences. The sociologist thinks we need to look at the influence that Jo's peers have had on shaping her choices and behaviours. And what about the impact of living in a deprived community and the role that the media has to play in all of this? The nutritionist says it's no good looking at those things if we don't tackle the fundamental problem of the affordability and availability of healthy versus unhealthy food and the huge role that the food industry plays. The fitness trainer says, well, Jo's got a sedentary lifestyle. That's the problem. We need to get Jo moving more. But the city planner thinks we should be trying to reduce that density of fast food takeaways in Jo's neighbourhood and look at using infrastructure to enable and support more active modes of travel, like cycling and walking. And the politician wants to have a debate with you about whether we should be using a sugar tax and legislation to try and tackle the problem from the top down. And the question of Jo's personal responsibility for her individual circumstances versus the role of the state in helping and encouraging us to lead healthy lives. Now, all of these different characters share the same end goal: to reduce the number of people in society like Jo who are living with obesity. But they're all looking at the problem through different windows. They're holding on to different parts of the elephant. One of them alone doesn't have the answer. So what about the public health specialist? Well, that's the category I'm in. And I would say all of these perspectives are different parts of one big picture. And we need to bring them all together to create multi-layered solutions. But on our own, we lack the resources and the collective buy-in to really do something effective on all of these different fronts at the same time, and crucially on a big enough scale to have the impact we need and turn the dial on those statistics. So what is stopping us collectively coming together and taking this kind of big picture approach right now? Let's look at 3 big barriers to big picture thinking. First of all, short-termism. There's often a huge amount of pressure on the people who are in a position to influence these factors to demonstrate that they've delivered an impact in a relatively short space of time. Maybe by the time the next election comes around or that next promotion opportunity comes up, not in 10 or 20 years or even longer. But we underestimate the amount of time it will take to really change these big problems. And we get trapped in a cycle of endlessly trying new things and then discarding them when a new government comes into power, or if they don't work straight away, or just because a new idea becomes fashionable. We need to get our national leaders to buy in to evidence-based long-term approaches. But to achieve that, it'll need all of us to move our own expectations of what we want from our political leaders and how we want our government officials to work. Another barrier is those separate professional and political camps. Some people refer to them as silos. Now, sure, there is a certain amount of joined up working and sharing ideas that goes on, but not on a big enough scale. And one of the key reasons for that is that whether they like it or not, they're often set up to be in competition with one another. Competition for the funding and resources that they need to put their solutions in place. So it becomes a choice between doing one thing versus another, instead of us doing all of the things we need to do at the same time and in a joined up way. We need incentives rather than disincentives for truly collaborative working. And the third barrier is our love affair with easy answers. We've all got suckered into that from time to time, haven't we? Those soundbite, black and white explanations for what's wrong with the world and who's to blame and what we need to do to fix it. And we share them around the internet at lightning speed, much more effectively than complex, nuanced, and evidence-based explanations for things. But they don't give us the answer. They're too simplistic, and they just set us up to fall into rivalries where we're pointing the blame and making accusations, but they don't get us any further forward. At best, it's like wiggling one toe on the elephant. To get out of that trap, we need to educate ourselves and future generations on the true complexity of the world we live in, so that we become empowered with a real understanding of how a multitude of different factors, all linked together, are constantly shaping our lives and influencing our choices, our decisions, and our behaviors on a day-to-day level. And some of those factors we're quite conscious of, but others not so much. When we collectively have that understanding, then we will be able to get to a place where we can create big, complex, multi-layered, long-term solutions for big, complex, multi-layered, long-term problems. And this big picture mindset isn't just an important tool for tackling complex societal issues. It's just as useful when we're looking at tough challenges in business or in the workplace or other aspects of our own everyday lives. So let's all try and move to a place where big picture thinking becomes the norm rather than the exception. Let's all start feeling the whole of the elephant. Thank you.